I've always been in good health, but that changed this year.
They're kicking me out of the hospital, and they even brought my stuff to me outside. It was that you have 10 minutes to get out.
I was in what they call a leukemia crisis.
The nurses had to pick me up out of the parking lot because I didn't know if I'd see him again. I'm Deanne Horst. I'm Marty's wife, and the story's really about him and what he went through, and I will try to get through this without crying because this has been quite the ordeal.
My name's Martin Horst. I go by Marty. Moved here to Hartselle July a year ago. My wife and I did. We moved from Leeds. Grew up in this area for the most part. My mom is from this area. My family has a family farm out in the Massey area, and that's where we moved to. It was my grandfather's house, and we started going to church here November a year ago. I've always been in good health, but that changed this year. Got sick in February with what I thought was a sinus infection. Fought that for 2 or 3 weeks. Wasn't getting any better, and then around the first week of March, got so sick that I ended up asking my wife to call an ambulance. I couldn't breathe. That was March 11th. I went in the hospital at Coleman for a week, and at the beginning of that, they tested me for COVID. They thought if I had tested positive, I was going to be the first COVID patient in Alabama. But I tested negative, and they kept doing other tests, couldn't figure out what was wrong. But I had double pneumonia. Both lungs were full of pneumonia. I was septic. I was in congestive heart failure from fluid buildup around my heart. And I think there might have been one other thing that was going on that I don't remember what it was. But by about the end of that first week at Coleman, they finally diagnosed me with leukemia and said I was in what they call a leukemia crisis, where all of my blood cells were pretty much cancer cells from AML leukemia, which is acute myeloid leukemia. They transferred me from Coleman to UAB, to the leukemia unit. They transferred me on March 17th, and on March 18th, my wife went with me. She was with me most of the time at Coleman. She went with me to UAB on the 17th, and on the 18th, the COVID-19 pandemic broke loose nationwide, and UAB went into their COVID-19 protocol, and they kicked everybody out of the hospitals.
They even brought my stuff to me outside. It was that you have 10 minutes to get out. So it was 10 minutes of, am I gonna see you again? I mean, that was a complete panic moment. When they brought my stuff down to the car, I was like, will you please tell them to call me when they put him on the vent? And they said, oh honey, he's already on the vent, he couldn't breathe. The nurses had to pick me up out of the parking lot because I didn't know if I'd see him again.
They kicked her out, and as she was going out one door of the hospital, they were rolling me into OR and put me on a vent, and I was on a vent for a couple of weeks, and I was completely out of it. Came to about 2 weeks after being on the vent, I started coming to, and they finally got me off the vent and went right into my chemo treatment at that point, and that was March 27th is when I started my first round of chemo for leukemia. I spent a total of about 6 weeks, I think, in the hospital during that first episode for my induction chemo and the treatment of that, the whole time of which we were under the COVID pandemic restrictions, so we couldn't have any family members there, so I had no support there at the hospital with me. And I got sent home on April 19th. The way leukemia, the treatment process goes is you get 7 days of chemo for your induction chemo, and then you spend 2 to 3 weeks there for the first session while they monitor your recovery. And if your numbers test right, then they'll send you home for 3 more weeks, and then you come back and start your following doses of chemo. And so they sent me home on April 19th. I was home for about a week, and I had been on an antibiotic called vancomycin. And I got overloaded on vancomycin, and it caused my kidneys to go into kidney failure. So the week after I got home, I ended up back at the hospital and back in the hospital at UAB for 5 more days while they worked on treating my kidneys and trying to keep them from failing on me. Those finally recovered. I went home after another week there, and then spent I think 2 or 3 weeks at home, and then went back in for my following rounds of chemo. And then I spent, each following round of chemo is, it's usually 6 days. It's 5.5 days or 6 days where you get 6 doses of chemo, and then they send you home for 3 weeks, and then you go back and do it again. Each round of chemo is, I can't think of the word for it, but it compounds, so your recovery and your side effects get worse each time. The first follow-up chemo I had, which there's actually a name for that. Oh, Consolidation Chemo is the follow-up chemo. After the first round, after the first couple of weeks, I actually cut the grass, borrowed my cousin's lawnmower and got on it and cut the grass one day, and just took my time, and ended up cutting the grass twice, I think, during that time. But then the next 2 sessions of chemo just wiped me out. I couldn't do anything. Recovery is usually about 10 days for your numbers to recover, but after the first round of Consolidation Chemo, the second, third rounds, those days got longer. It took about 12 to 15 days after the second round of chemo, of Consolidation Chemo, and the third one took about 2.5, almost 3 weeks for my numbers to finally recover. And I'm still feeling some of the effects now. I'm still real weak. Doesn't take very much to wear me out. Through all of this, those first 3 weeks or so, I don't have any memory of hardly any of it. I remember going to Coleman. I remember my brother and sister-in-law coming to visit me at Coleman the first couple of days, but I don't remember much after that. My wife said that her parents came and visited a couple of times. I don't remember them coming at all. I have a vague memory of being transferred in the ambulance down to UAB, and I remember being at UAB the first day or so, but then after that I don't remember anything until I came to from being on the vent. My wife had to handle the home, and I was our breadwinner, so at that point she was having to get in contact with my boss, but she had all kinds of things happen at the house too that were pretty much overwhelming. Would have been overwhelming for the both of us had I been there with her, but it was definitely overwhelming on her.
Lots and lots of things happened in the house, and you know, again, I'm not a country girl, and all these things are happening to a country house, and
ended up with a severe termite infestation of the house, septic tank problems, sink pipes came loose in the kitchen and filled the cabinet full of water there. Just all kind of issues. We had a dog, a young pup that we had had for, I don't remember exactly how long we had had her, but she wasn't very old, maybe 8 weeks old, and she ended up breaking her foot, and my stepdaughter got sick. All this at the same time. Within that first week I was in the hospital, all this stuff happened, and so my wife was having to try and be at the hospital with me, but also trying to take care of everything at home, so it was pretty overwhelming for both of us.
I had a teenage daughter at home, and that's her stepdad, but they're best friends, and he adores her and she adores him, and her best friend was sick. You know, her pillar of strength was sick, and so she struggled. And so I had to be strong for him, I had to be strong for her.
And then for her to get the diagnosis that I had leukemia. And before they diagnosed me with leukemia, when I was at Coleman, one of the doctors there told her that I pretty much was dying, and that there wasn't nothing they could do to stop it, that it was going to happen. And then finally they did diagnose me with the leukemia. But none of this was anything that I had ever dreamed that I would be facing in my lifetime, especially not at 52 years old. I was 51 when I first got sick and turned 52. Actually, the day I got discharged from the hospital the first time was my birthday. I don't know why God, well, let me back up. I'm not even going to say God caused this, because He doesn't always cause things. He just lets things happen, and they just happen. I don't know that I was being punished, but I can tell you I was not walking with God like I was supposed to before this. This whole ordeal may very well just be His way of getting my attention. And if so, great. He got my attention for sure.
I had been praying because I married a godly man, and like you said, he has just stepped away. He wasn't against God. He just wasn't the strong Christian man that I needed or I prayed for or what have you. And I just prayed, whatever, and I literally said the words, God, whatever it takes to bring him back to me, whatever it takes, I need my godly man.
I hope, and based on what I know from the Bible and God and how he works, he never lets anything go to waste. He always uses everything, good or bad, for his purpose and for his good. And I hope that somewhere down the line that my testimony and my ordeal going through this will help somebody else. I lost about 51 or 52 pounds. I weighed 228 when I first went in the hospital. And before I came home, after my first round of chemo, I was down to 176 pounds. I actually was down to 176 pounds after I came off the vent. So only about 3 weeks, I lost 50 pounds. I'm about 200 right now, 201, somewhere around in there.
Through our marriage, we were struggling, just like marriages do, and new marriages, learning how to be one, and my life and his life, and trying to mesh those.
Like I said, I don't know why exactly this happened to me, but it did. I know through all of this that my relationship with the Lord has grown tremendously. I didn't have a bad relationship with him. It just wasn't, I wasn't doing my part the way I should have been. But he definitely got my attention. My wife and I have only been married 5 years. We went to high school together 30 years ago, met back up 5 years ago, and here we are today. And I was not being a bad husband, I just wasn't being the husband God calls me to be. And I hope that all has changed. I've been working to be a better husband, be a better father, just be a better person and follow his will for my life now. I've always been a hard worker my whole life, growing up on a farm and working like I have. I've always felt like it was just my responsibility as a man, and I thought it was what the Bible said that we were supposed to do as men. We're just supposed to handle it. We're supposed to get things done and be in control. And probably one of the biggest things I've learned through all this is we don't have control over hardly anything, especially when it comes to just life itself. He's in control. And if we don't allow him to be in control, he will take control from you. And that's exactly what he did. I don't know where this is going to go from here, but I'm anxious to see and look forward to seeing where it goes. There's still a lot of issues I'm dealing with and side effects I'm dealing with. Getting stronger is the biggest thing. I feel like everything I do right now is in slow motion. I'm not nearly as quick as I was before. They say that'll come back, but it's going to be months before I get back to my normal self, or what I felt like was my normal self before all this took place. I'm thankful to be here because he could have very well chosen to take me home. And I was right there. I was at death's door. I don't have a memory of, like I said, when I first went in the hospital. I remember very little until I came out of the vent, came off the vent, came out of the sedation. I don't remember hardly anything for about those first 3 weeks. What else to say other than I couldn't have gotten through this without the Lord. I even mentioned that to some of the nurses and the doctors and stuff, which all my nurses and doctors have been wonderful. Coleman, I thought, was what I remember of Coleman. They were good. But the leukemia doctors at UAB have been awesome. They've been just wonderful. And the nurses really stepped up to fill that void that we had, myself and all the other patients not having any family members there. They became our surrogate families, and they did the best they could, and I thought they did a good job for what they were facing along with us as well. But I could hear other patients around me at times that were going through a whole lot worse side effects than what I was facing. I've been very fortunate, very blessed, in that my side effects have not been as severe. The doctors attribute some of that to the fact that I was in pretty good shape before this took place, and that I was still young, in what they call young, which I was glad to hear that. But I mentioned to some of them that I didn't know how someone could go through this without the Lord by their side. And they said, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that come through there that try and do it completely on their own and without the Lord. And I don't know how they could do it. This has been the biggest, hardest ordeal of my life, to have to get through. And and all the emotions that go with it, you know, the physical effects that I have or I've had and I'm facing, but there's emotional effects that go with it as well.
Because I had been part of the ladies' Bible study, I'd already met a few ladies at the church, and the outpouring of love was just, there's no words to describe the support that I got from the church, and the love and the prayers, and even when I needed literal hands-on things, I could make a phone call, and within a few minutes even, I had people at my house to help me. So, I mean, that you don't get that at every church. And so I knew I had the support here.
Knowing what my wife faced through all of this on her part, my kids, we've got 4 children total between the two of us. I've got 2 and she's got 2. 3 of our children are all grown. Her son is in the Navy and he's stationed in Virginia, and my son is in the Marine Corps and he was stationed in Okinawa when this happened. And my wife and my daughter got the Red Cross involved because at that point they didn't know I had leukemia. They thought I was dying. And the Red Cross flew my son home. And sorry, some of this still gets emotional. But my daughter was very instrumental in getting my son home, her having to call the Red Cross and spend hours at a time on the phone with them, trying to convince them to help and to get him flown home, and her not knowing while she's talking to them what my outcome's going to be, whether I'm going to survive and she's going to get to see me again herself because she's in Michigan. That's the emotional side effects to me, that to try to put myself in my wife's shoes and feel what she was facing and knowing, and the uncertainty of not knowing whether I was actually going to live or die. To put myself in my son's shoes as he's flying home from Okinawa. He's in the air for 18 hours and he doesn't know if he's coming home to see his dad or to see a funeral. And Hannah, my daughter, you know, she's in Michigan, and at this time the COVID stuff is keeping everybody from traveling. My son Caleb is, you know, he finally gets home with her and they're in Michigan. But even Lexi, my stepdaughter, you know, she's my buddy. It's all worked out for the good, for the best. My son got to be home for about 5 or 6 months. Due to the COVID thing, they've shut down their travel restrictions, so I've been able to see him 2 or 3 times. When I finally got well enough after my first round of chemo, my daughter and my son both were able to come down from Michigan and visit for a weekend, and they've been down a couple of times. We haven't seen my stepson yet, Park. He's in Virginia. We haven't seen him yet since I got sick, but we're hoping to see him soon as well. But just knowing, you know, what all my wife went through, I just don't know. Well, I'm thankful that the Lord was with her as well as with me, because it's not just been an ordeal on me, it's been an ordeal on my entire family. From my recovery, the doctors and the nurses were at times very impressed with my recovery, because, like I said, they attribute a lot of it, I guess, to my being in much better shape than most of the patients they see. So AML leukemia it's called an acute myeloid leukemia. The 5-year statistics for 5-year survival is 25%. So only 25% of people that get this survive for 5 years. If you make it past that 5-year mark, you're pretty much considered cured and it never comes back. But during that 5-year time frame, for adults 20 and over, the survival rate is 25%. It is a much higher survival rate for people under 20. For children or young people below 20 years old, it's about a 67 or 68% survival rate. The overall survival rate for kids and adults is about 27%. And from my recovery, the doctors were very impressed with how quickly I would recover through some aspects. After my induction chemo, so the first round of induction chemo is 7 days of chemo. You get a bag of chemo hanging from an IV that runs for 24 hours, and then for 7 days. And then the first 3 days of that, they also do what they call a push, which is a really, really high dose. I don't remember the exact chemo it is, but there's a bunch of different chemo drugs. But it's a really, really strong chemo that they push into your IV the first 3 days, once a day. And then you're in the hospital for 3 weeks. After that week, you're then there for 3 weeks while they monitor your recovery. What that first round of chemo, induction chemo, is for is it's designed to kill the leukemia. And that's what they check for. Once you finish that round, then 14 days after you finish your last dose of chemo, they do a bone marrow biopsy. And they check to see if the leukemia still shows. And if it's not there, then they proceed to follow the regular procedure where I go home for 3 weeks and then go back for the follow-up rounds of chemo, which aren't quite as intense as the first one. The follow-up chemo, even though the leukemia may have been killed, the follow-up chemo is just to remove any remaining leukemia cells that might still be there. They deal into thousands and thousands of cells with the leukemia. I've learned all this since I've got leukemia, or had it. But when I finished my first round of chemo, my induction chemo, I was up walking the floor within that first week afterwards when the side effects kicked in. Now they warned me, and I listened to the doctors. When they told me something, I listened to it. Usually I would call my wife on the phone and get her on the phone when the doctors would come in. And one of the big things they said is to don't get behind on nausea. If you start to feel nauseous, let the doctors or nurses know, and they'll get you more nausea medicine. So I made sure I did that because I did not want to be nauseous. I could hear other patients around me that were fighting that battle, and I knew I did not want to fight that one. But I was up walking. Within the first week, I was walking the floor and walking around the room, trying to do as much as I could for myself without the nurses and having to be the ones to do it. I would take showers myself, but I would have to sit down, and we had to order stuff for home for me to be able to do that at home as well. But the doctors and nurses were very surprised at how quickly I was recovering, through the different aspects. They truly didn't expect it to be as quickly as it was. And I'm not patting myself on the back, that's just the way my body responded. The staff, I can't say enough about the staff at UAB. The doctors are very open. If you have questions, you ask, they'll answer it. The nursing staff was wonderful. There's always one or two that aren't quite as good as the rest, but for the most part, everybody that I was involved with in my care was super. They were superb. So, it wasn't just leukemia that I dealt with. I ended up in kidney failure from the vancomycin antibiotic I was on, which is a very, very strong antibiotic. That was a week after I got home from my first round of chemo, and that was very scary. The testing they did on my kidneys indicated that had I had one more aspect of that testing, I would have had to go on dialysis for my kidneys. But my numbers started recovering very quickly on that, and that kept me from having to go through dialysis. My kidneys are now back to normal, they're fine. My heart's almost back to normal. I still have a little bit of, I have a heart medicine I have to take now for a while until my heart is fully recovered, but they expect that to fully recover too. I think it was after my second round of chemo, I was at home for about a week, and due to the kidney failure and the strain on the heart that caused as well, I have to be real careful when I sit up or get up and move around. I don't remember the term for it, but there's a term for it when your blood pressure would drop, when you first sit up. Well, I had got up one morning and went in the kitchen and was making breakfast and left her in the bed to sleep, and I passed out and fell out on the floor and hit my head and had a big goose egg come up right up here. Knocked myself unconscious. Fortunately, I fell from a sitting position instead of a standing position because we have concrete floors. So the concrete didn't give. I didn't end up back in the hospital for that, but it was just one other aspect of this that, I had to learn the hard way. Just take my time, don't get up and rush because it can hit you at any moment. So.
He's gone through leukemia, and that's tough. And the things that we've gone through together throughout this ordeal is tough. And he may or may not say this, but I would do it again to bring him back. And I would go through all that again to have the man that I have again. And he did bring him back. And we have a stronger marriage than we've ever had in 5 years. And we have a friendship that we never had. We have a closeness that we never had. And that to me was worth it all. Was this very tough? Yes. Were there many times that I literally was cooking dinner and making him something and we're sitting at the table and I would just fall over because there was no more strength left in my body to wash one more dish or to, cook one more meal or to even get up and go get in the bed. I mean, I was that exhausted from taking care of him, but I would just pray, Lord, just give me the strength to do it. And he would find me the strength and I would be able to get up and just keep going. And so that taught me more reliance on God. That taught me that even more that this is out of our control and that we can't do anything without him.
Initially, I joked with my wife about it and other people at times that, I got sick and went in the hospital, and a month later I came out and the whole world had changed, because it did, and I missed it. I was not a part of it at all. Now I've been a part of all those changes since then, but the world I knew it was not the same world I woke up in. I don't know, well, I'm not gonna say I don't know. I believe I went through this ordeal at the time I went through it for several reasons. The biggest being the Lord was trying to get my attention. I think had my wife been there with me now, looking back on it and reflecting on it, talking to God about it and praying about it at times, there's been thousands of prayers go up from people all over the place. I spent 17 years in Michigan, so my family, my kids up there, had people up there praying. I coached sports for 7 years, so I had tons of players and families that were praying for me. But had my wife been there with me through this, I don't know that I would have relied on the Lord as much as I would have probably relied on her. So that was one of the ways that he chose to get my attention, was I had to go through this alone, at least for the hospital side of it. Now, my wife has took care of me since each time I've come home, and she's been remarkable. I could not have asked for anything better than what she's done and been there for me. But to truly get my relationship where it needed to be, God had to have me one-on-one, and that's what he did.
The way that he's even brought me back closer to him, and just the relationship with God is just, I thought I was walking with the Lord too. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do or whatever, but the closeness that I've gotten with the Lord too, it's just drawn me closer to him and back in love with him and all that, and that's been worth it too.
As a church, there's times we have to rely on each other, but if we're not relying on him first, none of that makes any difference. And that's probably to me, one of the biggest lessons I've learned through all this is what we do as individuals, what we do as a church or as a group of people does not make any difference if we're not relying on him first and letting him be that guide that he's supposed to be, that his word tells us he's supposed to be, and we're supposed to give him that respect and that ability.
The very first words I said to him when we got the diagnosis of leukemia, because we had inherited his grandfather's property and that we're remodeling and getting it livable and such, but the first words I said to him was, the Lord knew that we needed a free house to live in. And so immediately, I'm like, he's already providing, or he's going to take care of us.
When I don't rely on him and I start trying to take it back in my own hands, I find out real quick things don't go the way they're supposed to. Things get more difficult. And that's one of the things that he has shown me through all this, is that I've got to be relying on him. And like I said earlier, I'm not in control of near as many things as I thought I was. I've always thought I was a good man and hardworking man, thought I was a decent father. But none of that makes any difference because it's not about me, it's about God and what God tells me I'm supposed to be, what His Word says. And He lays it all out very plainly for us. I've researched that since going through all this. I've read in the Bible where it talks about what man's supposed to do, not just as a husband, but as a man. And he has to be first and foremost. If not, the world gets very chaotic. And there's times that he will back away and he'll go hands off and let us follow our own path and see where that leads us to. And it's usually, well, I would say 100 times out of 100, it's not going to be the direction you thought it was going to be in. I would strongly urge people not to go the route I had to go. This has not been an easy ordeal at all. It's not something I would wish on my worst enemy. Leukemia is no joke. And there's no discrimination for leukemia. There's no age, there's no color, does not matter. You can get it at any time in your life.
But oh, praise God, He chose him to be the one out of 4 to save, and he's a survivor, and there's no words of gratitude and praise to God for saving that. And He didn't just heal him from leukemia. You know, He did a whole bunch of stuff in our lives and just showed Himself so powerful, and all the promises, all the provision, all the support, and everything that He did, we just can't praise Him enough for.
And like I said, statistically, it's not a great survival rate. 1 out of 4 survive, and that's a pretty low odd. So I'm very blessed in that He chose me to be one of those 1 out of 4, and I'm still here. I give all the credit to Him. I have tons of thanks for all the people that have been praying for us, praying for me, praying for my family. But all the credit goes to the Lord.
We literally have not missed a single payment of anything, not a single payment. We have more food in our house than we have places to put. We've had to actually give away food because we've been given and we have more than we have places for. And I remember a few weeks ago looking at my pantry and I said, wow, this is the abundance. You promised abundance, Lord. This is abundance.